Well, hello everyone, and welcome to How Well Are You, the talk show, where we're ending the stigma surrounding mental illness one show at a time. Thank you for joining us as we explore all aspects. We leave no stones unturned here. So we explore all aspects of mental health as we fearlessly attack or tackle, I should say, every topic. So whether you're watching live or you're catching the replay, we welcome you. And I love this journey that we're on together, encouraging, understanding, and compassion as we navigate the complexities of mental well being. Now, I want you to go ahead and hit that share button because we want everyone to know we're here right now. We absolutely appreciate your love and support. So don't forget now, during the show, if you hear something that resonates with you, make sure you show us some love. And that's going to mean a whole lot to us. So I'm Cynthia Mobley Howell, your host and the founder and CEO of How Well Are You, where our mission is to empower you to achieve your optimal health, both mentally and physically. At How Well Are You, we firmly believe in a holistic approach to well being. We take into account not only your physical health, but also your emotional and your spiritual well being. Together, we'll explore ways to nurture every aspect of your health to lead a fulfilling and balanced life. So, as we near the end of Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, I am so excited and honored to introduce our special guest who's going to be talking about something very important called the 72-hour hold. Now, this is a crucial part of psychiatric care that helps keep people safe when they're going through a tough mental health time. Our guest knows a lot about this topic as she's had firsthand experience. And she's going to be sharing some very valuable information that's going to help us understand how to handle mental health emergencies better. I want you to meet Deborah D. Ford, a diverse achiever with degrees from Clark Atlanta University as well as New York University. Deborah's currently pursuing a PhD. Yes, she's pursuing her PhD in general psychology at Capella University, and she serves as a legal domestic violence advocate here in Florida. With over 23 years in higher education, Deborah is a full time communications professor and an active member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Inc. She presented at the second annual OAAASGS, yes, y'all, that was a mouthful, conference, and authored a chapter in the book, Put Some Respect on My Name. And that's respect, RESPECK. Maybe she'll tell us a little bit about that a little bit later. Deborah is the founder of Melanated Momiac, and that is Mothers of Mentally Ill Adult Children. She has a YouTube channel for that, and she advocates for mental health, drawing from her personal experience as a mother of young adults with co occurring mental illnesses. Deborah aims to become a licensed clinical social worker and will start a mental health coaching certification soon. I tell you, this woman right here is on the loose. You got to run really fast to keep up with her or to catch her. So, everyone, help me welcome our guest this evening, or depending on where you're watching or what time of the day you're watching, help me welcome Ms. Deborah D. Ford. Hey, Deborah.
Hi, Cynthia. How are you?
I am absolutely Wonderful. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge that July is the BB Moore Campbell National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. I do not want to take the Black woman out of the movement. Oftentimes, when there are movements, we are sidelined and we get erased. I want to acknowledge that BB Moore Campbell determined that we need a National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month in 2008, and that is when it was established because of her connection with mental illness. So I want to acknowledge the Black woman who we are focusing on in this month because of her effort.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I was actually privileged. I don't know if it happened already this month. If it did, I missed it because I did see it. But I know last year I definitely was a part of that summit that was held. And I tell you, the information that is given during that summit is absolutely invaluable. So, yes, we do want to remember Ms. Moore because she definitely plays a very important part, even though she's no longer with us, but she still plays a very, very important role in this whole topic surrounding mental health. So, Deborah,
Absolutely.
yes. And I want to say that you're very welcome for appearing on the show. And I want to thank you for your yes. And we are going to get right into this topic because it's a topic that I'm very familiar with. And hello, Miriam. It's a topic that I am very familiar with. And I know that you are very familiar with. And for those of you who don't know what 72-hour hold is, Deborah, why don't you go ahead and define that term for us?
Oh, absolutely. One of the reasons why I mentioned BB Moore Campbell is because my introduction to the 72-hour hold was from one of her novels that I read. The very first novel that I read by her that I purchased was Your Blues Ain't Like Mine. And I fell in love with the writing. So I continued reading. And when I got to the 72-hour hold, it was mind blowing. She wrote about her fictional daughter, who was a pyromaniac and had other mental illness conditions. Now, mind you, I read this long before motherhood was even in my future. And so when it came time to have to make this decision for my children, I already knew what it was because of this book that BB Moore Campbell had written, aptly named The 72-Hour Hold. Now, it's also known by another name specifically for the state of Florida. The Florida Mental Health Act, commonly referred to as the Baker Act, focuses on crisis services for individuals with mental illness, much like an emergency department is for individuals experiencing a medical emergency. So the emphasis is on the crisis, the emergency component of someone who has a mental illness diagnosis, someone who has, for whatever reason, they have an exacerbated or an accelerated experience with their mental challenge. And so some of the components in terms of that is that they may be a danger to themselves or they may be a danger to another individual. And that's why the family may voluntarily place them under the quote unquote 72-hour hold. In Florida, it's referred to as the Baker Act. And so it has commonly been referred to as Baker acting someone when they need to be placed under a 72-hour hold.
Absolutely.
But it's
Absolutely.
it's needed for observation and it's needed for the individual to reset. So if a person is taking medication and in that moment they're experiencing a crisis, the medication doesn't seem to be working, and the family believes they're going to be detrimental to themselves, causing themselves harm, or their actions may endanger another individual, they may suggest to the person that they need to get some care. Now, determining or depending on the extent of the crises, they may be unwilling, and so it can become involuntarily held for the mental health reset. If they are understanding that they are having a challenging moment and they need to go in, then it's involuntary. But it functions in twofold. And so my personal experience with it actually came in 2011. My firstborn had been previously diagnosed with mental illnesses. And on one particular occasion, he decided he was going to run away. So he ran out the house and he just kind of dashed across the street and disappeared. And my daughter and I were trying to find him. She's very upset because of the manner in which he left. And I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, I flagged down a police officer because I don't even know that I had my phone with me. But eventually we see him coming out of the development across the street, the condominium community across the street. And he dashes out again. He goes back home, grabs his bicycle, and proceeds to start riding away. He's literally crossing my path with his sister and the police officers. And so we stop him. He stopped. The officers, thank goodness, they were very friendly. And they wanted to know where he was going. And in his mind, it made perfectly good sense. He was running away. Well, how are you going to manage if you run away? Well, he had $2 and some change. And in his mind, he determined that he could purchase a meal, a kid's meal, or something from the dollar menu. I don't know what his thought process was. But in that moment, in retrospect, I can laugh because this is a long time ago. But I'm thinking, my son, even in his state of whatever it was, him feeling at that moment that he couldn't take the environment, he couldn't take the space with his sister, he couldn't take the space with me, he determined he would get farther on a bicycle than he could on foot. He literally went back to the house to get his bike because that made sense to him. That was the first time. Same year, several months had passed. He's probably on a new medication now. And while he is on this new medication, I'm noticing changes in his behavior. So the anger, the hostility that I'm starting to witness seems more extreme than it did previously. So let me help you understand this a little bit. The first time he was Baker acted. He's in a pediatric unit of the hospital. And he enjoyed being there so much, he didn't want to come home. He got to visit with his sister. I guess it was like a respite for him, some kind of retreat, a getaway. Okay, all right. Later on, as I mentioned, he's on a new medication and the behavior changed. And I can remember I was admonishing him about doing something wrong. And he's sitting on the step. And then I said, just go to your room. So I don't recall if it was something attached to his behavior at an after-school program or at school. It wasn't something that he did in the home, but I was having a discussion about something with him. He closes the door. Next thing I know, I hear the door open and I hear a crash because he had thrown a collage picture. So it was, let's say it was, I don't know, 14 by 20, a collage picture. He took it off the wall and flung it in the direction of the step. Now I'm standing at the bottom of the step, so the glass could have cut me. It created a hole in the wall, but it could have cut me. And at that point, when I had to call the police, I first established my son's condition. I don't want you coming in here thinking there's a criminal activity occurring. He has a mental illness, and I identified it because I believe I asked for someone that has mental health training, something of the like, because it's not the standard type of 911 call. Do you have that division? No, there's not that division. Okay, let me explain very clearly. He's been diagnosed with XYZ. He's on medication. He just happened to have a violent episode, and I need him to get into a treatment. He needs to be Baker acted.
Let me before you go on, let me stop you right here for just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to ask you, well, you kind of answered a question that I was going to ask you anyway. So, but I might circle back around, I might loop back around. But what I love that you just said, and I need you all to really hear this, what Deborah just said. She said when her son was in crisis mode and she had to call the authorities. Now we have 988, who they are mental health professionals and they are the first responders along with law enforcement. These are people who are trained. But I need you all to hear this. She explained to them that her son was not a criminal, but he's having a mental health crisis. Because how many times, you all, have we heard stories where someone was having a mental health crisis and law enforcement was called and the person ended up dead? So keep going, Deborah. I just wanted to point that out.
Oh, absolutely. I needed it to be very clearly established. This is not your standard 911 call. And I was frustrated that there was not a division to handle it. I was not pleased with how the officers interacted with him, but there was nothing that I could have done in that moment. In retrospect, I wish I had driven him to the hospital by myself, because even placing someone in a police car to get to mental health facilities can be traumatic. So in retrospect, I really wish I had driven him myself. At that point, he was not, he was 11. I could have overtaken him, right? I can tackle him at that point. So I wish I had done that. But I think my concern was, because the reaction was a violent one, I did not know if he was trying to throw it at my head or not. So my concern was I need to help him to get to the facility. But again, in retrospect, I wish I had driven him there myself. So this time he's in a different facility because the pediatric unit did not have a bed for him. So now he's in a different location. He's in a different city. And this facility has a different arrangement. You can't have any children as visitors. So my daughter was absolutely distraught that she could not visit with her brother. And this time was not a pleasant experience for him. As I mentioned, his demeanor had changed because he was on a new medication after being Baker acted the first time. So there was that extreme challenge of recognizing that this medication is probably being changed too often. And I remember at one point, it may have been later that year or maybe a month or so afterward, I determined I've got to have a holistic approach for him because they're treating him like a guinea pig. And I remember calling the psychiatrist's office. I asked to speak with Dr. Whatever. He's not available. I need to leave a message for him. It was irresponsible, and this quote unquote, it was irresponsible of him to have treated my son like a guinea pig. I gave my name. This is my son, the patient. Irresponsible to treat him like a guinea pig, changing those medications too much. He's got a mental health diagnosis, but his brain is still developing. So you can't simply go from one medication to the next. And so at that point, I determined I've got to have a different approach for him. And so I maintained a holistic approach, and there had never been any outbursts as they had been that warranted him being Baker acted, being put on a 72-hour hold. So I'm truly thankful for that. And I would, again, I still would have him put into the facility. I would, just for the second time that I had to call, I would have driven him myself. I would have recognized that having him go in the police car, because he was in a different mindset. The first time he was in the police car, it was like no big deal. I need you to understand that his mind had changed. The first time he's on the bicycle and they're nice and, oh, talking
Now,
very.
was this the same? Refresh my memory. Was this the same year? Was he the same age with
Same
the
year,
bike?
same age, same
Okay,
year, same
okay,
age.
okay.
First time he was happy, he was wanting to run away. McDonald's money in his pocket, he can manage. If he gets on his bicycle, he can get farther quicker. The
So
second,
you're attributing this second or this particular episode to the fact that he's now on different and new medications and things are different.
the first time, no. The second time, yes.
Right. Exactly.
The,
Exactly.
the first time he was still my sweet jovial son. I'm not aware of what's going on internally. Um, and an unfortunate side of the medication is that it causes you to balloon. You literally pack on so much weight. And so over time, I could see him gaining the weight, and he felt horrible about his weight gain. And children are not kind, and there are even some adults that need a muzzle over their mouth. And
Well,
there was a part of me that just really wanted to yell at them, but I had to pull them aside and say, listen, he's taking medication. Because people say inappropriate things to children that can be scarring, in addition to children being bullyish, right?
well, the thing
But
that I love about you, and I've said this to you in our, prior conversation with you, that you are such an attentive and great mother when it comes to your interaction with what's going on with your children who are dealing with these mental health issues, because I don't have that same testimony with my parents, and nothing against them. They just didn't know any better. And I do believe, and if anybody doesn't know, I am one of four siblings, the youngest and the only girl, and all three of my brothers were affected by severe mental health issues. My oldest brother eventually committed suicide because he just couldn't manage, his bipolar disorder. My middle brother, who's schizophrenic, has been missing for over 2 decades. And my youngest brother, who's also schizophrenic, has been institutionalized for 36 years. But I said that to say, I believe the reason why their stories turn out the way they did is, number one, the stigma surrounding mental health issues. And that is why I created this show, because I want to stamp out the stigma. And my parents were devout Christians. And so, them being Christians, coupled with the stigma surrounding mental health issues, add to the fact that we were African American, and and that other, what goes on in this house stays in this house. So there were so many things that prevented my brothers from getting the treatment that they needed. And by the time they did get the treatment, unfortunately, it was too little, too late. So I want to applaud you for your involvement in the care of your children. I just had to interject that.
thank you for that. Thank you for that. I am, well, as I was thinking about how this interview would go, I remembered that I was going to stay on the topic that was designated. But there's a correlation between the three topic ideas that I presented. So if I were to show you a Venn diagram, they're overlapping circles. You have family on one circle, you have therapy on another circle, and they overlap with that 72-hour hold. So family, therapy, emergency care at the bottom. They're all interconnected. So one of the reasons, and I'm not going to digress, I'm not going to become tangential here, but one of the reasons why I was proactive is because there is a history of undiagnosed mental illness in my family. I'm not going to say any more on that. Let me get back to the children that I birthed into this world, because I'm not responsible for those other adults. I simply determined that based upon how things were not handled, that I was not going to contribute to that type of dismissive and unaware and benign, ignorant behavior. Okay, so that was 2011, and that was my son. Fast forward in time, 2019, Mother's Day. I'm in the kitchen. I can't remember doing what. My daughter's at the kitchen table. I can't remember doing what. All of a sudden, I remember her breaking down, crying, sobbing uncontrollably. One of her best friends in high school had overdosed. And apparently, when she got the call from her friend's mother, the mother simply said she overdosed and did not indicate, but she's, because this is important, that conjunction was needed. She overdosed, but she is under observation. She overdosed, she's in ICU under observation. Because imagine, for a teenager, overdosing is imminent death. Like, even if you say someone overdosed, they're gone. Unless you indicate they overdosed in ICU, they're in a coma, they're whatever it is. The stomach was pumped, and now they're being held in the hospital for observations. I don't think the mother, in her frantic state, you have to imagine, this is the mother calling and saying what happened to her daughter. So I can understand how that component may have been left out, but it left my child distraught. And I remember asking her, do you need some help? And then I remember asking her, are you feeling suicidal? Like, you just found out that your friend overdosed. Her response was, yes. Okay, sweetheart, we're going to get you some help. Mother's Day 2019, I drove my child to the hospital for her to be Baker acted. It was painful. Wow, what a Mother's Day to me, but it was necessary. You're going to get some help. And I remember as I visited her, I was describing her inability, her brain's inability to, because she has anxiety and depression. She was also diagnosed with something else. I can't remember the exact diagnosis, but co-occurring conditions. My son as well. She has different co-occurring conditions than he does. I remember describing her situation in layman's terms. I said, sweetheart, your brain is stuck on this sad song. It just keeps going round and round. I said, you have got to find a way to move from this sad song, because the next track may be a party track, but you're stuck on this sad groove and it's making you miserable. I need you to be able to move from this sad song so that you're not having a broken record syndrome moment. That's how I described it to her. And so then found therapy for her. I was always mindful to look for Black therapists so that she could find some connection, some immediate identification. And we'd had it before. We were in family therapy. Let me back up to make sure you understand this. So after that incident with my son, I found new therapy for completely. We're not dealing with these clinicians. We're not dealing with the white therapist, and we're certainly not dealing with a white psychiatrist. Took me a while to find a Black licensed clinical social worker, but I found one, and male at that, because I wanted my son to be able to have that connection. So we were in family therapy together. It was wonderful. It was beneficial. And then later on, after we were no longer in sessions together, that's when this transpired. My daughter needed something for herself. So the focus had been on my son because of his diagnoses. And I realized that there were things that were going on with my daughter that didn't seem to be standard. But I believe I was so drained from dealing with my son till it took me a moment to shift from his situation to her situation. Now, I will say this, I am so grateful. God is merciful that I've not been tag teamed with the crises situation for both of them at the same time. That may have broken me. So I'm thankful there was a respite, years, almost 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 a decade respite in between the two. So now I can focus all my attention on my daughter who is in need of my help. Okay, what do you need? We drive 30 minutes to get you to the session. We'll do it. You need now you have a psychiatrist, you're going to take medication, you'll do it. And so that was working for a while. And then my child, in her still developing brain, decided that because people were telling her that she's so much more calm because she's on medication, she's so much more calm, she determined she wanted to see if she could function without the medication.
Now,
Oh,
did this lead to a situation where you had to end up Baker acting her again, or is she at a point now where she understands that, okay, I'm off my medication, and you have a conversation with her and she understands what she needs to do? Either she does or she doesn't do it. But did it get to a point where she was having any type of behavior, or was she in any type of crisis mode where you had to end up Baker acting her?
well, thank God she did not have to get Baker acted again. One of the challenges that she faced is that my daughter has never been able, she's never learned how to swallow medication. And so a big problem with her taking medication was that if you're chewing something that is time release, it's going to be irritating to your esophagus, everything, the lining of your, it's too much. And so at a certain point, I had to concede she cannot take this. Let's see if there are some vitamins that she can take, that she can chew, or it can be dissolved in water. And if she can start to apply some of the techniques that she's learned in therapy. So again, she is not as extreme with her diagnoses as my son is. So it's different. They're co-occurring for both of them, but they have different outward expressions of their mental illnesses, if that makes any sense.
It
So,
does. It does. And what we're going to do is, believe it or not, time is going by so fast. So we're over halfway through the show now, and I do want to take a quick break. And
okay.
so just hold on to those thoughts. And when we come back, we're going to go ahead and allow you to complete those thoughts. And then I want to ask you a couple of questions about the 72-hour hold and what you believe about it, if it was effective. So just a couple of questions because of my experience with it. I just kind of want to see, and I know things have changed a lot now since I dealt with my brothers when, when we had to Baker Act them, but I'm just kind of curious as to how things are going now. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to continue delving into this topic of 72-hour hold. You all have been listening to Ms. Deborah D. Ford, ABD, and she is sharing with us about the 72-hour hold Also, she's sharing her experience, some of her experiences, of course, that she has with her two children. Deborah is actually the mother of two adult children who are challenged with mental illness. So when we come back, we're going to delve more into the topic. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back, everyone. And we want to say thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. If you're still here, Rosalind Atkinson, I wanted to acknowledge you and say thank you for joining. Miriam, thank you so much for joining. And I did want to mention a comment that Miriam made earlier. It's so amazing how we so often assume some things. I had mentioned earlier that being raised in an African American culture, as well as a very my parents were they were devout Christians, rather, and how I believe a lot of that contributed to the stigma surrounding mental issues or mental health issues. And that's why my brothers didn't get the treatment that they needed when they needed it. But Miriam said that she's Dominican Republic as well as raised Catholic, and it's no better there either. So I wanted to mention that because oftentimes we have these stereotypes about certain communities, about certain religious affiliations when it comes to certain things. So I just want to thank you so much, Miriam, for sharing that and for clarifying that. I stand corrected. I was speaking as if these types of things only happen in African American communities and in strict Pentecostal backgrounds, which I was raised in. But I did want to mention that. We're back with Ms. Deborah D. Ford, ABD, and she's been sharing with us regarding the topic of 72-hour holding. As we were on the break, I was reflecting, and so many times I get choked up because I start thinking about my brothers and the experiences that I had with my brothers and still having, because two of them are no longer around. One of them died by suicide. The other one has been missing for over 2 decades, and the other one has actually been institutionalized for 36 years. And I haven't been able to speak to him for 2 years because he just does not want to talk. But he's the one who was always having to get the 72-hour thing, and I was at work. I'm trying to work, to put food in me and my son's mouth, and I'm having to get off my job on a regular because he's terrorizing the neighborhood. And so I definitely understand. And my brother was more than a notion. He was more than a notion. When I say he was terrorizing the neighborhood and those outside of the neighborhood,
Wow.
he was a terrorist. And thank God that he wasn't murdered by the police, because he was a likely candidate. If anybody on here knows me and knows my family and knows which brother I'm talking about, they can attest to that. He was a terrorist. And it was because of his mental health issues, though. And then when you talk about your son, you would have much rather have driven him to the hospital than him having to be put in a police cruiser. And I remember the time when we would call the police, and this was before 988, so it was just 911. So the police were the first responders. And I remember the time when they would show up and they would escort my brother out of the house, and he would be very calm. But when it came time for him to be put in that cruiser, that was another story. They better be. My brother was very thin. He was very thin, but he was very strong. So after a while, they knew my brother, and they knew when they got the call and the name, they knew the name, they knew they better come riding 4 deep, because he wasn't going down like that. What I wanted to ask you is, how effective did you find the 72-hour hold? Was there a time when they did the 72-hour hold, either one of them, and you know how that works? When they come out, they're supposed to go for outpatient follow up and all of that. Did you find that to be effective, or was there a struggle to get either one of them to do the follow up that they needed to do in order to maintain?
For my son, after the second 72-hour hold, I don't believe that the treatment that he received was effective because he was still on that medication. And so that was not changing. And so sometimes you blur things in your mind, and you have to blur them in your mind. You have to block them out so that you can move forward. I just remember that experience being one that was negative for me. I was not looking at positive results in my son, and I was so disgusted with the fact that the medication was changing so quickly on an undeveloped brain that I decided no more. It can't get any worse than this. No more. I'm going to try a holistic approach. I'm going to find new counseling for him. Let me do a new restart, if you will. For my daughter, one of the things that I found out in her therapy session, I believe I determined this in a therapy session, it may have even been while she was in the hospital, my daughter had been self-harming. She had been cutting. Now, oftentimes people think about looking at the wrist because sometimes they will cut the wrist. But my daughter had been doing it on her thighs, which is not an area of skin that's exposed. So there would be nothing for me to look at and say, what is this on your arm? So when I'm emphasizing her depression and anxiety and another diagnosis, and my son with his depression and anxiety and another diagnosis, I need you to understand that there are a number of manifestations of depression that you may not be aware of. I got to fast forward in time a little bit because I don't want us to run out of time. So this year, 2023, I thought, and I consulted with my therapist and my son's therapist, trying to decide if the best way to treat a situation was to get him into a residential drug treatment program or to have him Baker acted. This is this year again, where the idea of potentially needing to Baker act my child came up. This is my son again. And as recently as last month, the end of last month, I had to make a 988 call while my son was on the line. I did a three-way because he wasn't going to make the call. So the idea of it being a one-stop experience is erroneous. It can potentially continue. And that's the reason why I decided during this month that, number one, I can't be the only one. But also, as a Black mother, I have a different kind of concern because my son did not show his face, did not make his presence known, was not answering phone calls, was not answering text messages for about 2.5 consecutive days. And he did not have his medication. That was my concern. If you're going to go off the grid, you're an adult. You are allowed to go off the grid, but you don't have your medication. And I'm concerned about you not having your medication going off the grid. Now, to fill in the gaps on why he might have been going off the grid, we had visited a residential drug treatment program. And at that moment, I believed that my son was going to run getting cold feet. He didn't want to do this again because I had put him in a residential drug treatment program last year. On July 4th, here's the holiday again, is when I found out the type of substance that my son was abusing. So he had, unfortunately, different bouts of relapse. Okay, enough is enough. I can't look at this anymore. Let's find a treatment program. The therapist is very intimately connected with a number of treatment programs, made the referral. We had a visit. And I believe if he had been admitted on that day that we had the visit, it would have been fine. But he had enough time to think. And the only reason why I didn't force it in that moment is because his phone service was out and I could not communicate with him if his phone service was out. So I needed to wait until the weekend to get that situation rectified. Well, that's when he becomes MIA. And I remember thinking, day number one, okay. Day number two. So it's going on to the third day. Where's my child? I hope he has not run. And I hope he's not run because he doesn't have his medication. That's the biggest concern. You have the option to not want to do this, but you can't not take your medication. I don't want you to get in a situation where it becomes worse. And then I started thinking, how do I handle this? Because now he's a Black man. I'm not calling the police in any capacity because he's a Black man now. He's not a child. What do I do? Do I call a mental hospital? Do I ask them to give me a tranquilizer gun? Do I put out some type of APB and say, don't touch him. Just, make the announcement. Call your mother. Contact your mother. Like, I didn't even know how to handle that. And literally later that night, I contacted the facilities where he was supposed to be admitted to, and I asked, well, maybe my son voluntarily checked himself in. Let me contact them. They contacted the nurse's station. No, he's not reached out. Okay. That's when I just pray, oh God, please, please, please. Heavenly Father, sweet Black Jesus, I need some help. I don't even know what to do. And then probably about 2 hours later, he walked in the door. But that was a real concern, literally last month. If do I have to beg rack my child? Because I remember when I was on the phone with him. Son, where are you? Let me come get you. I don't want you to come get me. He was so despondent. But he kept calling me and then hanging up. Oh, God. Okay, let me call 988 and let me do a three-way. Because what I'm telling you is going in one ear and out the other. Maybe you need to hear it from someone else. And I remember speaking with my therapist and his therapist, and then, finally deciding, okay, let him work on the drug treatment component first, because while he is in some type of program, an extensive out treatment program, he'll get all the other services. But literally, the idea of the 72-hour hold was something that I had to contend with last month. I didn't know which one to do. Am I putting him here, or am I putting in this type of program? And so all of these services, one of the reasons why I will post this information. It's not for the individual that's going through the crisis. They don't know that they need it. It's for the family members. How do you help someone when you hear of this? When a cousin reaches out and says so forth and so on, you should be able to have that information at your fingertips. It should be as common to you as your first and last name. Oh, you dial such and such. Make them call. This is what you need to do. I'm not doing it because I'm feeling in a sort of morbid mode and I want to bring anyone's mood down and depress them. It's informational. It's informational, number one, because I have, unfortunately, the first-hand experience of how this operates. And I know that it is beneficial. It is better to do something than to do nothing. Even if it doesn't work the first time, there are plenty of medications that don't work the first time. Do you say, I'm never going to take medication again? You try the one until you get it right. You try a physician sometimes. You change physicians multiple times until you get the right one. You may have to change. That is a part of it. Your brain is an organ in your body. If you're going for treatment based upon some physical condition and you don't believe that treatment is helping you, you're going to say, I'm never going to the doctor again? No, you'll find another physician that treats XYZ ailment. It is continuous. It is not automatically eliminated just because they get older or because they've been using something for a period of time. You may have to take it for the rest of your life. And so what? If you need the help or the medication to function, then you continue with the program so you can function. And if you're a parent and you're listening to this and your child is not functioning properly, you don't need to suffer in silence. You didn't do anything wrong. That's another part of the stigma. What did the parent do? They must have done something wrong. Number one, if it's genetic, it's in the genes. You can't do anything about it. You didn't choose what DNA pool you received from. But now that it's in front of you, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to say, well, they didn't make themselves and that's it? Is that it? Absolutely not. I mentioned I was trying really hard not to mention the family component. But when you have seen something and it is dysfunctional and you look at the manifestations of it in adulthood, you recognize, no. I've got to address this now and early. And one of the things that I am grateful for, I don't take credit for doing what a mother should do. These are my children, I birthed them, right? But I will say this, I am grateful that the idea of therapy started so early to its normal. It is nothing to them at all to have therapy. Matter of fact, when my son went MIA, I told my therapist, what gives me relief is that he was still in communication with his therapist. That is what gave me relief. He didn't completely check out. No, he didn't want to engage with me. He didn't want to engage with his sister, but he was still in contact with his therapist. It is so normal for both of them. When my daughter was at Howard University, I was paying out of pocket because her therapist was no longer accepting insurance, $100 a visit. My child's out of state. I'm spending $400 a month in addition to paying her rent to make sure that she is okay mentally, because people will become despondent and sometimes they succumb to this type of feeling that they can't get past. I never wanted her to feel alone. You have support. I don't care how much if it would have cost $200 a pop. First of all, your therapist is so personal to you. You need that person to get you and you need to benefit from what you're receiving. So there's no way that I was going to change her therapist while she was away. Now, when you get back to a more familiar and stable place and you are emotionally more content, then we can talk about, sweetheart, it's time for you to find somebody else. But not while she was alone by herself out of state. I wasn't going to do that. If it had cost $200, I would have taken out a loan. Let's get you through your senior year, and then we'll think about changing it. It's got to be something that is so innate that it doesn't cause any pause for your children as they're growing up. Because what happens is if you wait till they get to adulthood, then they resist it. I don't have such and such. Nothing's wrong with me. Nobody said anything was wrong with you. I don't know if you recall, I used the word standard earlier as opposed to using the word normal. Because we're all a little bit off in our own ways, right? We all have our own idiosyncratic behaviors, right? Yours just may be preventing you from doing XYZ things. That's where the challenge lies. If it is preventing you from functioning in any capacity, causing a detriment to yourself or causing a detriment to others, then it needs to be addressed. But if you are recognizing that some of your behaviors are not standard, let's talk it out. You can't stand me as your mother, feel free. Yell, scream, rage, call me a bitch all you want to the therapist. Get it out your system. I'm all right with that. I am absolutely okay with it because at the end, as you are developing, I want you to be okay. I want you to learn the tools to express yourself, even if you are dissatisfied with me. I mean, they're young adults now, so I'm simply, as my therapist said, I'm just a consultant in their lives, and I'm okay with that. But when they were younger, and I'm the disciplinarian, I'm the authoritarian for them, you might not like me. You might want ice cream for breakfast and to drink soda all day long. And the answer is no. And guess what? I can't stand it.
Speaking of what you just said about making sure that you set those certain boundaries, and they may or may not like you, whenever you had to take action with your son, daughter, to do the 72-hour hold, did that garner any type of negative vibes between you all after the fact? Were they upset with you, or because you did what you did, and how did you all work through that? And we're coming to the down home stretch, but I definitely want to hear your answer to that question, because that was one of the things when I was dealing with my brother and I had to, Baker act him, and I knew that he knew, and it might have a lot to do with sometimes maybe him not talking to me, even though this has been many, many years ago, but I think he still holds some resentment against me, because it seems like every time that either the 911 call had to be made, or I had to go and get the paperwork to get him 302 or whatever, it was always me having to take action, because my mama, for whatever reason, just didn't want to, because that was her baby, even though he was a grown man. But I was the one that was always, I was the bad guy. And I still believe to this day that he probably holds some resentment against me because of that. So how did that kind of, as we come to a close, I really want you to talk about that for just a couple of minutes, about how that worked out with you all.
In the earlier years, I believe that there was a type of trauma that was experienced by my son from this being Baker acted the second time. But what I do believe is that he's been able to flesh that out in therapy. That's why therapy is wonderful, right? He recently admitted to the therapist that he doesn't believe I caused him trauma attached to his weight. His perception is that with me trying to stretch his clothes out on his body because the medication made him gain weight, that I was somehow saying that he was fat, and me doing that made him feel horrible about himself. He just now, 2023, admitted to the therapist that he now realizes that I did not cause him trauma as it relates to his size. I was simply trying to help him so the clothes weren't fitting so snug. Sometimes you wash something, it shrinks. It takes time for them to move past. And again, my children have mental illnesses, and sometimes he gets in a state where he wants to revisit something and he becomes agitated. He just got to the space where he's able to recognize, you know what? My mom did not do that. Okay. My daughter, this is right after her graduation. So this is this year, graduation ceremony. We had a long discussion and she talked about that experience and her perception of it. I had to address it. It was not me doing something against your will to harm you. I was trying to help you. This is what I knew to do. Your friend is in the hospital. She took a bunch of pills. They had to pump her stomach. She attempted to commit suicide. My daughter's an empath, so she takes on the emotions acutely of another person. So when she says she felt suicidal, let's go. I'm not going to sit here and simply pray on you. Okay. First of all, I should have been prayed up already because I know what's going on with my kids to some degree, right? You can't know everything in the moment. If you believe in prayer, if you're a person of faith, you in that moment, what was I going to stop and drop to my knees? No, let's go to the hospital and pray again afterward, right? Let's pray that while you're there, this service is going to benefit you and that you will learn the techniques. I remember buying a certain fragrance for her to use, and not the humidifier, I can't think of what the name is called, a lavender scent for calming, so she could be calm when she felt extreme anxiety, ways to calm herself down and to journal her thoughts. You got to use the tools that you're given. Yes, you are still going to deal with X, Y, and Z, but now you've got information how not to succumb to it and to be all absorbed in the negative energy that is surrounding you. So she is also gradually getting past that experience. And then at one time she accused me of focusing more on her brother. I said it's a balancing act. I'm just grateful that I didn't have to experience the crises simultaneously. Like give me a minute from dealing with your brother before I can attend to you. I'm not negligent. I just need a minute to decompress because I'm human, I'm one person, and then my fullest attention is going to be on you. So, yes, in the moment, there may be temporary resentment, but they will recognize ultimately if they're willing to do the work. And that's why I'm emphasizing if they start earlier, like just normalize it. Let's go for a family talk session. Just normalize it, because once they get older, they're more resistant to it. They're more likely, more prone to be dismissive of it and reject it wholeheartedly, and that's going to do themselves a disservice, and you don't want that. So it's got to be something that we can experience to benefit ourselves. Think of it like a well care visit. I'm just going to check, if there is something wrong, then there's continuous treatment. And if there's not, well, then that's good. Then I know that everything is okay. And we continue on to the next visit. It's got to be normalized. It's got to be normalized, because when we have a stigma attached to something, we operate in shame. We don't want to address it because of shame. We don't want to feel that we are different from other individuals because of shame. We don't want to feel that we need some kind of help because of shame. I want to remove the stigma from my people. It is okay if you need help. If there is something that poses a challenge for you, work on it so that it's not challenging the next time. And if it is, just continue working on it so that you can continuously progress. That's what I want. That's what I want everyone to understand.
Wow, this is good. And we're out of time, but we're going to have to come back again. We're going to have to bring you back because there's some things that you touched on that we really need to delve a little deeper into. And but wow, you all, I know that I have gotten a lot out of this conversation with Deborah, and I know that you have, and I want you all to please like, like and share this, because there is somebody out there that's dealing with a loved one who is being challenged. And one of the things that Deborah said, and we want her to come back and we want to talk about that is one of the things, one of the reasons why I'm here. And it's about early intervention. It's about standardizing. Yes, standardizing, since you made a new word, normalizing is easier to say. But it's about making it a standard, just like your wellness checkups. And then that way we don't have to be a lot of times in crisis mode. If we start out early and make this a normal situation, then there won't be so many 911 calls, or there won't have to be so many 988 calls, or there won't have to be so many crisis situations. I honestly believe that. I honestly believe that. Now, you actually can see Deborah's information that's scrolling. You can connect with her on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on her YouTube channel. I love that. Melanated Momiac. That is moms of mentally ill adult children. That's who you've been talking to. And Deborah happens to have two children that's dealing with mental health challenges. And she seems to be dealing with it pretty good, if you ask me. And I'm so grateful that you would come and share with us just a portion of your experiences. Miriam says, "I agree. It should be it should be normalized too, because everyone has a story." And Miriam, you are absolutely correct. As we end, because we are definitely out of time, but as we end, Deborah, I'd like for you to share with our audience some parting words when it comes to the 72-hour hold. What would you say to someone who has adult children, obviously, because you are a mother of adult children with mental health issues? What would you say? Because I know some parents, I know some people that have reached out to me that have adult children that's living with them, and I don't know if they're telling the whole story, but they're like, they're gonna have to go, because I don't I'm not I don't I'm not comfortable with them being around my wife, who is their mother or what have you. But they're not saying if the person is acting out. Yeah, they're acting bizarre, but it's one thing for them to be displaying bizarre behavior, but it's another thing if they're displaying behavior that is potentially harmful for themselves or for those that are around them. So for someone who's out there that has an adult child that lives with them or that doesn't live with them, and that child is displaying behavior that's potentially harmful either to themselves or to those around them, what would you say to them at this point? Because, we're past this, or we're trying to get past this, I don't want anybody to know situation. We have really got to get past that. So what would you say to that parent, and how can you encourage that parent? This is what I would say. What would you say to encourage that parent to go ahead and take the action that needs to be taken, and deal with the consequences later of how they may feel about you?
Yeah, that's a very heavy question. The only thing I can suggest is definitely do not call 911 if the person is in an aggressive and violent state. Do not. Our interactions with law enforcement do not end well. We don't want that to happen. I would sooner contact the hospital and have them put in a straitjacket and me visit them in an institutional ward than to view them in a casket. That is my positioning. And I phrase it exactly like that to my therapist when I was describing the situation. In order to save you from yourself, I would rather visit you in an institution with a white straitjacket than to view you in a casket. So, parents, number one, it takes courage to reach out, do what is based upon the behavior that you see being exhibited. If it is a violent behavior, you're going to need assistance with that person. I need to look into whether or not they can use tranquilizer guns. I really do, to sedate someone so that they can be docile as they're going to the facility, because you don't want to anybody fighting. You don't want anyone fighting your child to get them to go get the help, which can end in their loss of life. We don't want those type of situations. But we want you to think of yourself as the advocate. If your child has a mental health condition, you are a mental advocate by proxy. So you've got to step in on their behalf. You've got to take the steps on their behalf. But you need to consider what you would do before it happens so that when it's occurring, you're not at a loss. Again, I have to go back to BB Moore Campbell. She's an ancestor now, but I thank her for writing that book, The 72-Hour Hold, so that when it was time for me to engage with my own child, which I had no clue what I was having, if I was having when I read that book, but it was familiar to me in the writing. And then the experience of it made me understand this is necessary for the second time for my son, for the first time for my daughter, and even for potentially third time for my child. If you need help, we're going to find the help for you. You cannot be in denial.
Wow. That's heavy. That's heavy. That is heavy. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know I have been, again, I have been educated. I have been really, really motivated to definitely continue to do what I do here. So we want to thank Ms. Deborah D. Ford, ABD, for joining us this evening and sharing her heart with us. And like I said, I know she has a whole lot more on a couple of more topics that we need to delve into. And I'm definitely going to have you back so that we can delve into those topics. And I just want to say again, thank you. Thank you. Hi. This, okay.
Thank
I
you.
don't know. I need to just address him real quick. I don't know how much of this you heard, Mr. Robertson, but if you didn't hear the whole thing, I really would advise that you go back and listen. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And he and I have been communicating quite a bit, and he knows exactly what I'm talking about. So thank you so much, Mr. Robertson, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen,
Want
ah,
to
time,
acknowledge Miriam Perez, Rosalind Atkinson for joining. Thank you.
yes, time is gone. And it just goes by so fast. So this has been Cynthia Mobley Howell with How Well Are You, the talk show, where we are ending the stigma. One show. We're ending the stigma surrounding mental illness one show at a time. And thank you, Miriam, for joining us. Join us next week, same time, same place, for another exciting show. And as I always say, until then, peace and be well, and God bless.